Welcome to the next edition of Grid Forward Forum. I am Bryce Yonker. Today with us, we have Michael Miller. Mike, thanks for being on.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mike, I see your profile says you're VP of Technical Services at ASCE, but I know we reached out as well around your role with ASCE. So maybe you can introduce both ASCE and yourself.
Sure. So I am VP of Engineering Services at ASCE, and ASCE is an inspection company that inspects utility assets, critical utility assets in our industry. With ASCE, well, I've been in the industry for about 37, 38 years, with about 20 years of utility experience, some experience with manufacturing, and then now with ASCE about 4 years. And ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers, is an organization that's about 160,000 strong worldwide, all civil engineers looking at and designing infrastructure. We also write codes and standards for the industry that's used in the industry. And when I say industry, I mean all infrastructure industries, which includes, buildings, bridges, water systems, just all kinds of things that civil engineers do in their regular design practice.
Yeah, grid and everything else. And we're reaching out in particular because the ASCE recent report has scored infrastructure across the country. Can you maybe tell us briefly how does the organization do this research and prepare these reports? And why are we focusing now on the electric grid and within that publication?
Sure. So that report comes out every 4 years. And what it is we report on all infrastructure. So that includes all these other categories. There's over 18 different categories. And the grid or the energy category is just one of 18. And the way that it happens is ASCE, of course, has staff that puts together a draft report, and then based on information that they have, and then they send it to a subcommittee, which in our case is the Energy Subcommittee, and then we go over that. And these are subcommittees that consist of practicing engineers in the industry. And then we go through it and modify it. And what's really unique, or why that's important to have as part of the infrastructure portion of it, is that there is an acknowledgement, there's an interdependency between power and almost all infrastructure, whether that's natural gas or water. So this realization that it's important, or perhaps even more important in some cases, to take a look at the grid and the power sector within the energy portion of the infrastructure.
So I have the report up here. Page 70 has a beautiful transmission tower, but a D+, so not a great score, reflecting one kind of notch down from the C- in the 2021 report. Kind of from a highest level, what factors contributed to the result for the rankings this year?
Yeah, well, D is a poor rating, poor and at risk. The reason why that rating came about is really four main reasons. One is we have a higher growth than what was predicted over the last, say, 5 years or so. We've seen growth really skyrocket due to data centers and all kinds of other demand. And the generation, the supply side, has been struggling to keep up. It's been keeping up because it has to, but it's of course more difficult to add generation to the grid than it does to add the demand in the data centers. And so there's kind of a disconnect between that, and that our non-dispatchable generation really has gone up with renewable power, and that's a good thing. Diversity of the power is always a good thing. But a lot of that has increased the challenges. So that's another kind of component of that. There's been, FERC Order 2023, which has to do with interconnection requests. That has come out, which has helped, but a lot of utilities haven't fully started with that. The other part two, is just capacity constraints. I mean, we are, as a grid, have been operating closer and closer to the design limits, kind of as a whole, as a nation. and there's a lot more congestion and a lot more unique operational constraints that we don't normally have, like curtailing load for risk of wildfires, difficulty in obtaining outages. It's just there's a lot of constraints and capacity that we're dealing with now. The third is just the condition of the distribution circuits. On average, say 92% of all weather-related outages are on the distribution space. And so there's a higher risk of failure due to extreme weather events in that portion of the circuit. Now, naturally, part of that is because there's just a lot more distribution lines, and so it's more subjected to risks. But there's other reasons for that too. But that was one of the main items. And then finally, just the public's kind of low tolerance of power outages. There's a pretty big change in the public's perception of a power outage, and we're a lot more dependent on power. As we know, as we deal with just everyday life items that come up. And so these four items are the main kind of drivers that were driving the poor grade this cycle.
We can talk unpacking all four, but maybe we'll weave in and around all of them. The publication dives into resiliency, and it's something we touch on in almost all of our conversations. What are some of the bottlenecks that kind of are driving that score, or that you're seeing in general in that area, and how's that impacting, the capabilities of the grid?
Sure. Well, there's bottlenecks, but there's also kind of general resistance to change and new lines. There's, of course, permitting challenges and all that goes into that. So the whole idea of new construction, there's a pretty big pushback from the public on that. Plus, it costs. I mean, there definitely cost is a consideration for new lines and new greenfield lines. Those are definitely part of it. Plus, just the perception of the cost of increased inspection. So, if we're advocating for increased utility inspections, and there's a perception that costs a lot of money, but in reality, it's the cost of not doing that can be up to 15 times the cost to restore these lines if they do go out of service. And then just the attitude of kind of set it and forget it, build these things, set it and forget it and not think about it. That's kind of our tendency, just as humans, is to build something and not have to worry about it again. But really we need to maintain these systems as their critical infrastructure, and they need the attention that they deserve. And so that's mainly the issue there.
Can we talk a little bit further about the asset inspections? Are there some best practices that you all are seeing there? Is there a frequency that you would recommend? Is there some automation that you're seeing? We're seeing a lot of new kind of capabilities that allow maybe situational awareness on the grid without, somebody physically being there. And what are your thoughts on how we can move that area forward effectively?
Yeah, that's a challenge, and that's being, investigated a lot from some of the California utilities who've had a lot of experience with wildfire risks and curtailing load due to wildfire. And so they'd like some clues as to when that could occur other than just wind speed. But there's other utility practices. I mean, in general, there's kind of rules of thumb for inspection, routine maintenance inspection, and that would be on the transmission side, ground-based inspections roughly every 3 to 5 years, and that's a good rule of thumb for transmission assets. Aerial inspections also yearly, and a lot of utilities do that already, just to pick up any issues that they might see. And then on the distribution side, which is really where the challenges are, it's just ground-based inspections of 10% of the system, roughly annually, and then not to exceed 10 years for any asset. And so, and because they always tend to be wood pole construction, wood poles decay over time. And so it just makes sense to have eyes on it. If they don't have that, I mean, if they're starting from scratch, if a utility is starting from scratch and coming in and developing a new inspection process, first they need a full inspection, to find out where they are with their whole system. But typically utilities already have a pretty good idea where their problem areas are, and they can focus on those areas with these inspections.
And similar on the resilience and reliability topic, I saw the table in there on the massive outages. Many of those are driven by climate extremes. So, what sort of impacts are you all seeing as threats to the grid that also might be challenging? Is the grid up for the challenge?
Yeah. So climate and climate change is a big topic of conversation at ASCE right now. And of course, it's impacting the grid system. A lot of these high cost storms are just becoming really expensive. And so the restoration costs are driving a lot of the decisions. And Superstorm Sandy, over 90,000 wood poles were decimated. And so almost every large storm event has this very large cost component associated with it. And it's getting worse, right? I mean, climate change is the higher temperatures are increasing more energy in the atmosphere, and that's just creating larger and more frequent storms. And also, I mean, we've saw some of the storms recently in the Midwest. These storms are different storms. The whole grid really is designed based on large uh, atmospheric boundary layer storm events. Now, these are large storm events, including hurricanes on the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic coast. But it's not really designed, and never was designed, for convective storm events. And these are thunderstorm events, derechos, and what are called convective straight line winds. These winds are different. And so that's with climate change and higher temperatures and everything else, we get more and more of these types of events. And so we need to increase our reliability and our resiliency in order to combat those types of events. And that's a challenge.
So if you look at EEI data or think about what the focus of some of the infrastructure laws was, a lot of it was directed at hardening and advancing grid capabilities. Has that made any impact on the status of the grid? I mean, the report results immediately aren't showing that, but what are you all seeing from some of those initiatives and activities?
Yeah, well, it's a good start. Both the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021, and then the IJA, the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, were great investments in energy. I mean, a lot of other investments and other parts of that too. But over $578 billion was allocated through. Part of that was through credits to promote renewable energy. Some went to rural cooperatives. But yeah, the challenge of that is spending that money, right? And tax credits are credits, right? They're a little bit different, and so it does have a positive impact. But there's still, even with that level of spending that really hasn't occurred completely yet, maybe half or 60% of it maybe has been spent. There's still a huge gap, and the gap is massive. It's like $1.3 trillion if you really look at what needs to happen. And from a federal investment standpoint, I mean, all of our projects in our grid are really funded by ratepayers, right? So this is a good thing. The federal process is infused money, which will really help our money as the ratepayers' money go on farther. That's a good thing, but it is a challenge to spend that. And of course, it's not expected. It's like a seed money in a way, right? There was some R&D that went to it, but not a lot of it went to build lines, right? Some of it did, but much of it went to studying, which is good. Some studies that were done. But still, there's a lot more to do, and it really doesn't touch some of the other items that we need, like a whole new grid, maybe even a new backbone or an enhanced backbone of a grid, say from 500 kV to 765. A lot need to be done.
Significant investment just starting to come along, and thanks for reminding us that we ratepayers pay the grid, and we taxpayers pay for the federal government. It's everybody's dollars that are going towards it. So
that's right.
So I have a question here about codes and standards. I mean, go as deep as you want on this area. Updating these is pretty wonky, but really important as far as making sure that the infrastructure that we have stays up to date, stays best in class. Any perspectives on addressing that effectively?
Yeah, it's a big area of topic of conversation in my my area as well, because the U.S. is the only developed country that I know of that does not have a standard that focuses on reliability and resiliency for physical assets of the grid. And I'm talking about the structures, the wires, everything that's physical about that. The FERC and the NERC has a reliability standard, of course, but that's related to the operation of the grid. There really isn't a loading standard that's associated with our grid, other than what's been the de facto kind of standard, which is the National Electric Safety Code, which is a safety code. It's not a loading code. It's not a design code. It's not to be used as a design code. And that's why utilities traditionally have kind of taken on themselves to develop their own processes to do this. And so one of the things that ASCE is doing, and we've developed and started developing a process for a new national line design or structural design code that for loading. We have several codes for the strengths of structures, whether that's lattice steel or tubular steel poles or concrete. But we're developing a new loading standard for lines, for structures that are supporting overhead lines. And that's really important. And we're incorporating not only the transmission structures, which are typically structures over 69 kV, and from the bulk electric system standpoint, that's 100 kV and above, but also distribution structures, right? Which is where the problem lies. And currently, the NESC, the National Electric Safety Code, which is most of the nation is covered by that, currently has an exemption for any structure that's lower than 60 feet will only get a wind speed applied to it of 56 miles per hour. Now, there's a lot of storms that go more than 56 miles per hour. So this is one of the reasons why we feel it's important to have a national loading standard that perhaps increases that a little bit. Not much, because that has cost implications, of course. So doing it in a kind of a smart way, and it won't happen overnight, but have a sourcing document that's a consensus-based document that's from ASCE, that's like the building code, but it's applied to our structures in our industry that will increase reliability, resiliency, and provide the tools that utilities need to be able to make the decisions on that regard. And so it's an ongoing process, and I'm chair of that effort, and we are almost there to develop the standard. And we think it'll get out to publications. It'll be publicly available for comment probably later this year, and then early next year will come out and will be published for utilities to reference. And then that could be referenced in legislatures, and the public utility commissions can reference these too, as well as all the ISOs and the other utilities that need to reference it.
Costly distribution upgrades, frequent extreme weather events, demand surging from an onslaught of distributed energy resources adoption. Do these challenges sound familiar? If so, you need Virtual Peaker's cloud-based distributed energy platform. We're empowering modern utilities with next-generation virtual power plant solutions to maximize the value of DERs. The Virtual Peaker platform unifies all aspects of DER management, from DERMS to customer engagement and demand forecasting. Learn more at virtual-peaker.com.
Maybe we can pivot a bit. We talk a lot about need for added flexibility in running grid systems, and so that can include, demand side management. It can include distribution resources getting aggregated and dispatched on the grid. Energy storage ends up playing a really key role in that area. How do you see some of these components coming along, and maybe at scale, where they can help to support running grid systems better, and maybe even bumping the grade up a little bit if we can use them at like I said, the scale that's necessary?
Yeah. So, and this is a great new technology that utilities are really adding to their system. And like, for example, here in the state of Texas, we're adding we have now 11 gigawatts of battery storage, and the U.S. is planning on adding another 18.2 gigawatts of battery storage, utility scale, and so that's good, and it, of course, from my perspective, and what I hear is that that shaves off the demand peaks on the top, right? And so it's not a catch-all problem solver for the whole problems that we have in the grid, but it helps. And that's why really the solution is a combined effort to have not only battery technology, but also all these other technologies, distributed generation, generation closer to the source, all these types of technologies that are growing and developing right now, and that will help solve these problems and increase the grade over the long term, I think.
Great. You have a recommendation, and I'll just quote it here: a national hardening plan for generation and transmission and distribution for rapid restoration of energy systems after disasters. What does it look like to start to put together that hardening plan and make sure our infrastructure is resilient and able to recover quickly?
Well, there's a couple of aspects to that. Probably the most important in my mind is a black start generation capability. So this is something that if there's a black sky event, we talk about a black sky event that could occur where the whole grid goes down for whatever reason, then how to get it back up quickly. And that's, that feeds into resiliency, but physically it requires separate or dedicated generation stations that are dedicated for black start operation. So that's one thing. And that's, that requires planning, that requires a lot of effort to get that up and running. And we're currently doing that here at ERCOT in Texas. Also, just developing other ancillary services such as fast frequency response. So as one of the results of having all these different inverter-based technologies on the grid, you can have disturbances. They're much more prevalent for system disturbances, and they need to be addressed. And one of the ways to address it is having a fast frequency response type of mechanism, so that those systems can be sensed, those perturbations can be sensed, those transients, and then quickly acted on, so that you don't have a large power outage. Perhaps, although the data is still coming in, but the Portugal and Spain outage might have been associated with this type of event. And we think that if that event would occur in Texas, we do have the capability to sense that, and we think we could have responded, or at least the grid operators believe they think they could have responded in a faster way, and that it could have been avoided here in Texas. But you do need that technology kind of spread out nationwide, and so that these things can happen. And so that's what's really meant by a hardening plan, looking at as a holistic way in order to harden the system for these types of disasters and events.
A lot of the infrastructure we're talking about is deployed by utilities that are managing transmission distribution infrastructure. Maybe regional markets have a key piece of it, or transmission system operators. But maybe I can ask you a question about state regulators. What kind of a role do the state commissions, as they look over the jurisdiction in all of their 50 states and are determining investments that can be made in the grid, what sort of a role can they play? And in their own state, can they kind of ensure that their systems are robust and reliable?
Yeah, and they play a key and important role in regulation. And probably one of the most important things, of course, is to have knowledge of the new things that are happening in the industry, to keep up with new items like this new standard I was talking about. If they know that it's coming, they can prepare for it. And what they can do is, working with their state legislatures, they can incorporate those types of requirements into law and be ahead of the game and not be reactive, because no one wants to be reactive to problems that occur. You want to be proactive. And one way they can be proactive is to know that these things are coming, and then streamline new and upgraded constructions. I mean, there's many things that can do at the state level that will aid new construction, and that's another item. Then just encouraging the item like dynamic line rating technology. So all these new technologies that really will help the grid, they should really be encouraging them in whatever way they can. Also, they probably already do this, but they should encourage the use of these reliability trackers and indices. There's a variety of trackers that are available that are either self-reported by utilities or they're required to be reported depending on what state. But, really look at those, because the public is, like I said before, I don't know, losing patience is the right term, but their appetite for loss, for outages is just not there. And so they can really help by having all this information at their fingertips, so that they can really provide that information to utilities and know what the status is of the utilities' performance in this area.
It's been a fantastic conversation, Mike. I've got one more question for you. We get to put our forecasting hats on rather than our looking backward hat. What would you say the outlook for the next 4 years looks like? What are some of the most important areas, to potentially improve the grade, and as you guys gear up for the 2029 edition, to look into what the score will be then?
Yeah, well, the buzzword today, of course, is resiliency. And of course, if you ask what that means to any one person, you'll get a variety of different answers. So, in the grid space, in the utility space, it really depends on what we're talking about. But for me, in my interpretation of it, and many on the committee, is you have to develop plans. So restoration plans, because increasing the reliability of the grid costs a lot, right? I mean, you could spend a lot of money to add more stronger structures and things like that, but more lines. But to develop a plan, that doesn't cost very much, right? So develop a restoration plan and include stocked material, because you have to plan for the worst, and that's really key. And so that may mean you're stocking more steel poles or wood poles than you would normally do, or stock conductor or and that does cost, that there's no free lunch here, but that could go a long way toward restoration when it needs to happen. And then just, again, plan for black sky events. I mean, we don't like to think about the worst happening, but they could happen. It could happen. And if you plan for it, it will go a long way. I was setting up Tiger teams, setting up pre-designated teams to be able to dispatch certain areas, doing the pre-engineering that needs to be done to really know where the vulnerabilities on the grid are and determine, and I'm talking about structural vulnerabilities, so that you know where to locate your crews in the events when these come. And of course, the utilities in the areas that are dealing with hurricanes, they already do this, but other areas in the U.S. that aren't used to large events that may take out half the system or so forth. So those types of things need to be included. And in all the other stuff that I talked about, encompassing new technologies to the maximum extent possible, although they do cost some, right? They do cost money, and we're sensitive to the cost of these things. But a plan to perhaps integrate that over a period of time might be doable. Things like that. So there's a lot can be done to increase the grade, and it isn't pie in the sky stuff. It's stuff the technology is available today and could be just incorporated with all the other things that utilities have to do with. But they do a good job. I'm not criticizing utilities, because they have a lot on their plate, and it's just gotten a lot more difficult for them with the stronger storms that are happening now.
Mike Miller, thank you for being on with us. I don't know, maybe I'm going to pull for a C in 4 years. We'll have you on in 4 years and talk about where we're at. The 2025 report card for America's infrastructure by ASCE, a comprehensive assessment of America's infrastructure. Great resource. We'll link to it in the podcast notes after there's the hard copy. Thanks for being on with us.
You're welcome, Bryce. Good to be with you.
Thanks again to our season sponsor, Virtual Peaker. If you enjoy Grid Forward Forum, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform, give us a like or a review, and tell your colleagues. You can listen to all episodes and learn more about our efforts to advance the grid at gridforward.org.